If you have a scary story you'd like to hear on the channel, then go to mariesfield.com and send it my way. I'd love to feature it. And of course, much appreciated. This happened to me and my friend when we were 21. My dad was never in the picture, so it was always my mom and her man of the month. I never got along with them because they were always mean, abusive, or just used my mom to flirt with me, but she never believed me. Needless to say, my relationship with my mom definitely could have been better. I bring this up because as soon as I graduated high school, she sided with her boyfriend that I needed to get my own place and stood in the doorway as I packed up as much stuff as I could and left. Thankfully, I have one of the best friends a girl could ask for, Jamie, and her mom agreed that I could stay there. Jamie was trying to figure out if she wanted to go to college, so her mom had no qualms about her living at home. I wasn't planning on going to college, but I already had a job and agreed to help pay the bills or my rent while I was there. Jamie's mom, Carla, was the mom I always wanted. She was kind, compassionate, and open with both of us, so my concerns and questions that I would normally ask my mom for help on, I went to her. I even had a pregnancy scare at one point, and they were the only two people that knew about it. I bring this up to understand a bit about my history and why I was always with Jamie. I know I wasn't the best kid growing up. I skipped school some days, I drank, talked back to my mother, and would, what the police would call, run away, but they never did anything about it. I already know I should have been better for myself, my own future, but I do still blame my mother for this as well because I never had a stable home that I could go to or trust, especially when there was a potential predator living under the same roof. With that being said, Jamie and I often partied with friends. We'd screw around at the mall or other retail stores, sometimes getting loud and would be asked to leave, or we'd start getting heavily watched by AP or something. This incident happened to be one of those nights that we went a little too crazy. It was January 24th. I know this because it was my birthday, and I was turning 21. I wanted to go out and get my own drinks and just party till I was sick. Jamie was cool with it, and after some convincing, Carla agreed to let us go as well, but told us to make sure to call if we needed a ride or if anything happened. We live in a large city, so we could walk just about everywhere, which was nice since I couldn't afford a car anyways. So we planned on hitting a few bars on this one block and then just hanging around the area. We're both thinner girls, but I'd like to think I could handle my own if something happened. I also carried a pocket knife concealed as a key on my keychain, so I had a little protection. We got to the first bar, ordered some specific fancy mixer, and got ID'd, then wished a happy birthday. From there, we had a few drinks from people enjoying their nights as well. After a while, there was a large group of older women that came in and kept staring at us, so we decided to bounce. We went to another one that was a tiny half bar. It looked like it was one building that cut in half for the bar, and the other side was a small printing shop. There were a few older men sitting in a booth watching TV. The bartender was playing one of those bar top video card games. We got a few drinks there, but if I as much as laughed too loud, they all looked over at me, so we didn't stay there very long. We found another one and headed there, and this would be the one we spent the rest of the night at. There were a few cars parked out front, but when we entered, they were pretty packed. Most of the tables were full, and people were standing by the bar talking and dancing and just having a good time. I knew this would work out for us too. We got in, got a few drinks, and just started screwing around. We tried playing darts and failed. We played pool and did an okay job, I thought, but there was one guy that kept trying to correct the moves we were making. We didn't give a damn. We were already buzzed and were just impressed with being able to shoot the balls in the holes. There were a couple of guys sitting at a tall table right next to their little dance floor, so I dared Jamie to go and see if she could get us free drinks. After some negotiating, she finally gave in and we walked up to their table and I asked if we could sit our drinks there while we danced. They kind of looked at each other and grinned and said yes. We put some money on their little jukebox thing and started dancing. Thinking back on it, I'm sure we took it too far, but we were doing dumb dances, grinding on each other, things like that. After a few, one of the guys motioned us over and they brought us some drinks. We also started doing shots, stuff I had never had before, and just started talking and legit having a great time. After a while, they went and started dancing with us, doing the same. Several drinks and songs later, more and more people started buying us drinks, and we lost track of the original two guys we were sitting with, but that didn't stop us. Knowing me though, I started getting too rowdy. Some broad was getting mad about us laughing and screwing around and told the bartender we were underage and had fake IDs. I was pissed, pretty much tossing my ID at them, telling them it was real and to check it, but they told us we just needed to leave. The fact that the bartender and the women yelling at us were calling each other by their name tells me she was probably regular, so of course they would side with her. After a few more choice words, we gathered our stuff and just left. It was pretty cold that night, and with us being pretty intoxicated, we could hardly walk straight. We wanted to go to this local 24-hour taco place, and as we were talking and putting on our jackets, a guy walked out of the bar and asked us if we needed a ride. Jamie started to say no and that she would just ask to use the phone to call her mom, but I insisted on getting a ride to not bother Carla since it was so late. I vaguely remember this guy sitting at the bar smoking, so I figured he was cool enough. I got in the back seat. Jamie sat up front since she knew the taco place better than I did and could give directions. Like I said, I was pretty drunk. Jamie held herself a lot better than I could, and I am incredibly thankful for that to this day. She gave some direction as to where we were trying to go, and I made a dumb comment about the store across the street because it was dumb. As we buckled in, not expecting a long ride, we made some small talk with the guy when, in the middle of me talking, I noticed he didn't turn down the road that I thought was the road we needed to take. As I noticed this, Jamie seemed to as well, and as we both looked over to tell the guy, the look on his face had changed to very serious, and he was gripping the steering wheel hard with both hands, staring forward. He looked up at me in the mirror, and I just remembered feeling terrified at that moment. It was the same feeling I got when my mom's boyfriend assaulted me, but there was nothing I could do, and I've now put my best friend in the same situation. I started looking around the back seat to see if there was anything I could do or use, and there was nothing. The car was completely clean. All I could do was sit there in fear, watching as he drove by street after street and onto the highway. However, Jamie was the brave one in this case. She started talking to the guy and trying to get him to talk as well. She thanked him for the ride and said she wished there were more people like him out there trying to protect younger girls. She said we were out for my 21st birthday and just trying to have a good time. She said something to me and all I could choke out was, "Yep." She said she was excited to start college and make her mom and little brother proud. She did have a little brother at the time. He was around 12. She asked if he went to school, and he gave short answers, saying yes, what he went for, but didn't talk much otherwise. She said what she was most excited about was being the first grandchild to go to college and make her grandma happy. Also true, but I could see what she was doing. She then asked him if he had someone that he was proud of or someone who was proud of him, and he didn't answer. We just sat there quietly for a few when we finally heard him sniffle. He got off the highway, pulled up to a bus stop, and unlocked the doors. He told us to get out, and we both quietly but quickly jumped out of the car. He then said, "Good luck in college. Don't do anything you don't want to do, even if someone else says it's for your own good," and took off. That's when I hugged Jamie tight, and she punched me in the arm and started crying. She told me as soon as she noticed he wasn't slowing down at the turn, she looked down at the floor trying to figure out what to do when she saw 2 rolls of duct tape and an empty knife holder. So she went into the guilt trip, hoping it would work before we started pleading. I'm thankful she was clear-headed enough to do this because I was frozen in fear thinking that was it. We walked over to a gas station and called her mom to come get us. We didn't have any info on the guy past him having a green car and what he looked like. We told Carla about it and she freaked out, and we went and got prepaid phones that week. I'd like to think I'm more careful now. I don't get into random people's cars. Hell, I won't even take Ubers because it gives me anxiety, and I don't go anywhere without someone knowing where I'm at and my phone. So, to the guy that almost abducted us, thank you for changing your mind. I don't necessarily never want to meet you again, but I hope whatever demons were haunting you, I hope they went away, and I hope you're doing better. My parents owned property in a very rural area in Minnesota. I loved going up there in early January for our late Christmas and staying for the week. They have a little guest cabin that I typically stayed in, so I have my privacy, but it's only ever me and my dog. Not that I minded though, because it feels like I have my own place. I live in Texas with 2 roommates that I could do without, so it's nice to have some quiet. I'm from Minnesota, but I moved to Texas for school and was planning to move back once I graduated. I hate your highways, Texas. Anyways, the snowfall at my parents' property was almost therapeutic. During the day, it was always dead silent, like the snow just buried anything that made a sound. And at night, it was only ever lit up by the moon. Otherwise, it was pitch black. Like you can't even see your hands in front of your face. I always enjoyed walking around back in the trees because it reminded me of my childhood. I would go back there and have a whole imaginary fortress, friends, enemies, and creatures to fight off. So walking back there as an adult brought back memories, and I always seemed to find something that I left, hid, or even lost. I got there the first week of January since we were on a holiday break. I went in and talked with my parents, had some coffee. I swear they drank coffee all day long. Mom knew that I would be there around dinner, so she already started making my favorite casserole. After eating, I went to the cabin to get ready for bed. The next morning, I got up around 8 to my dog DJ needing to go out. I was still groggy, so I just threw on my boots, still in my pajamas, and opened the door. Being such a large area, I wasn't worried about him running off or anything. He's a St. Bernard, gifted to me by my parents, and was about 4 at the time, so he always had a lot of energy. I should have known better because of the about 3 minutes I stood there, he was instead playing in the snow. I got him back inside and decided to get dressed and walk around for a few before bothering my parents. As I mentioned, DJ was very well trained, so if I told him to come back, stay put, follow me, he listened. And he could also tell when I was upset and would comfort me or protect me. As mentioned, since I got DJ from my parents, this wasn't the first time he had been back in those trees either. So we were starting to walk back there, jumped over the small ditch and through the trees. As expected, it was completely silent. There was a slight hum from the wind blowing, the taps of tree branches hitting each other or bending, and the crunch of snow beneath our feet. I was just walking and trying to identify the different trees when I noticed I didn't hear DJ walking with me. I stopped and looked around and realized he had stopped walking a few feet back. I called for him and he just stood there looking at me. After a few more times, he finally came, but walked slowly towards me. I was thinking maybe he was ready to go back, but it was unlike him to tire out so quickly. So I decided to keep going a bit, and if he stopped again, then we would head back and maybe go out there again tomorrow. Not much further though, he stopped again, and I noticed because this time he started whimpering. I looked back again and said, "What's wrong, DJ?" That's when I noticed he kept turning his head sideways, like he was listening for something. So I got quiet and listened too. After a few seconds of not hearing anything, I tried to get him to keep going when he started growling, and then I heard something that sounded like a tree breaking or snapping. It was possibly just a tree breaking under the weight of the snow, but DJ's reaction had me on edge that it may have been a wild animal, so I decided to head back. I didn't want to disturb it, and I definitely didn't want either one of us hurt. I turned around and started walking back and called for DJ, but he wouldn't move. He continued to just stare straight ahead, growling. I finally raised my voice and said, "DJ, let's go, now." Then I heard my voice, clear as though I just repeated myself, say, "DJ, let's go." It wasn't like an echo. It was like I just listened to my voice being recorded and replayed. I had no idea what I was hearing at that point, and it freaked me out, so I knew there was no playing around. I tugged DJ by his collar and yelled for him to go again, and he finally took off with me. I was walking quickly with DJ right beside me when I heard a blood-curdling scream. It made me jump and cover my ears. There were no houses nearby, so at this point, I'm hauling ass out of there. Thankfully, DJ followed, running ahead of me, and then just stopped, turning around and barking. I looked back to see nothing there, but suddenly it felt like someone pushed me down from my back. I landed in the snow, and DJ was nearly on top of me, fur raised, growling and barking so much there was drool flying everywhere. I just sat there, dumbfounded, trying to figure out what just happened. I looked around and didn't see anything that I could have tripped on, and saw no one or nothing nearby that could have pushed me either. I had to try and calm DJ down, and finally snapped him back. I've never seen him like this, but at least I knew he was good at protecting. My roommates always screwed around like punching me, and he would bark at them, but nothing like this. I got up, legs were a bit shaky, but at this point, I was out of the trees. The cabin was close by, so I walked quickly to it, looked around one more time, then DJ and I rushed inside, locking the door. I stayed there sitting on the couch with my dog for quite some time until we passed out. For being 4, he was huge and could keep you warm, so it wasn't hard to fall back asleep on him, not to mention all the energy we just expelled. I woke up to a knock on the door, which was my dad. I didn't tell him what happened at the time because I had no idea how to even explain it. Everything I could think of just made me sound crazy. Later that night after dinner, my dad asked if I went out to the trees yet because he knew I liked going back there. I must have had a look on my face because they had asked me what was wrong. I just told them that I think I may have disturbed something back there, and it got DJ worked up, so I just went back to the cabin. They just suggested what it could have been and left it at that. I didn't mention anything else about it to them, but the next day, I walked over to where I entered the trees and noticed there was one set of footsteps and DJ's tracks, but there was a drag mark serpentining behind me. I wasn't carrying anything that would have caused it, nor was it from my dog because I could see his tracks in mine. I could tell DJ was on alert though, so we just went back. I hung out at my parents' place most of the day and then headed home from there. I still have never mentioned it to my parents, but I told a close friend of mine who thought it could be some kind of being that could mimic voices, but I'm still not sure if I believe in all that. But what else could have copied my voice so perfectly? Since then, I try not to think about it, but when I go back up there, it's immediately on my mind. I wonder if DJ remembers it too. This happened back in the spring, sometime in the early 90s. I don't remember the exact year, just that it was at the beginning of April. I could probably look it up, but honestly, it's not hugely relevant to the story. I do recall that I was a kid, probably around 12 or 13 when this happened, and while it's not the most eventful situation to ever happen to someone, it was enough to basically imprint on my memory and give me nightmares for a few years. Nowadays, it's pretty much just an interesting story for me to tell others about. Like I said, this was back in April of that year. It was the first week of the month, and our city had gotten hit with a bit of a surprise early spring snowstorm. The weather had gone from decent and in the low 60s to well below freezing and tons of snow coming down in less than 48 hours. I remember that I was super happy about it because it meant we got at least one more snow day, but my mom and dad were less than thrilled. The weatherman had said there was going to be a decent amount of snow, something like 3 or 4 inches, but then it actually snowed a lot, and it just kept going. I swear it had to be over a foot, but I was also still young, so it probably wasn't quite that much. I recall the first night of the storm was actually a bit intense. There was a mix of freezing rain under the snow, then it snowed for several hours, and then it had kind of fallen into a weird mix of both. This caused a bunch of trees to freeze over and was causing a good amount of damage from falling limbs. We, thankfully, didn't have too much in ways of trees around the actual house, just a few in the backyard that were near the rear of the property. Unfortunately, there was one that was half dead, and the ice was the catalyst to the whole thing falling over, or at least half of it. On that first night, probably around 9 or so, I remember I was on the couch and my mom was in her chair. My dad had already gone to bed, and the two of us were waiting to see if school was going to be closed the next day, even though I knew it was going to be. We were just sitting there, and I remember hearing a really loud snapping sound coming from the rear of the house, and then the entire house just went completely silent and dark. My mom told me to stay where I was and went to wake up my dad, which really just made him angry more than anything. But he went out to the garage and grabbed a flashlight from his toolbox, and then my mom and I lit some candles. It was seriously creepy to be there at almost 10 at night with the whole house just completely silent, other than my mom trying to find the number for the electric company's emergency line in the phone book. Fun fact for those that have never had a landline phone, those copper lines didn't require power to the house. They worked even during most power outages. My dad just kind of sat in his recliner and went back to sleep, while my mom was doing all the work to get a hold of them. I was just kind of sitting there, staring out into the front yard and watching the snowfall. I remember looking at all the houses I could see from the window and pointed out which neighbors had also lost power, mostly by porch lights. There were a few houses that were still on, but most of them looked like they'd been affected. I remember my mom saying something about them not being able to send an emergency crew until at least the next afternoon because it was happening everywhere, and they started talking like adults, trying to figure things out, so I tuned it out of my head. The next day was pretty much the same. My dad went to work, and my mom and I stayed home, just trying to stay warm and get some housework done around the upstairs area. This may seem like a strange thing to say, but it's important to what happens that night. That afternoon, the power company did come out, but they had pretty much told us that they had to run a new line from the pole to the pole in the back of our house, and that it wasn't going to be able to be done that day, which meant that we were about to hit day 2 of not having power or heat. Thankfully, our house was well insulated, and we had a gas stove because we were able to keep it warm and make food, albeit by candlelight. That night, though, was when the creepy situation actually occurred. That night, we were all sitting in the living room, my dad falling asleep in his chair, and my mom was reading a book by candle. I was just sitting there in the living room, and I was bored. I remember just sitting there and doing nothing much of anything when my mom told me to go down to the basement to get something. I don't remember what it was, probably another candle or another blanket from the downstairs closet, and because I wasn't doing anything, it was my job to head down and get it. The basement area in the house was set up in a way that it was mostly finished. When you went downstairs, there was a few main rooms, one of which pretty much was empty. Another one was storage with boxes and Christmas stuff, and then off to the side was a closet. Whatever I needed was in that closet that was straight at the bottom of the stairs. So I went down and opened the closet to grab it, and I remember that I heard something coming from the next room over. As a kid, I think I was mostly curious about what was going on, so I slowly walked over with my flashlight in hand and shined it at the door. As soon as I shined the light over at the door, whatever it was that was moving around stopped. This, of course, confused little me, so I went over to the door and pushed it open, shining the light into the room. Part of me was expecting to see something like a mouse or an animal or something, but that was not what I ended up seeing. In the room, standing in the group of boxes, was a full-grown man. I had no idea who this man was, no idea why he was in our basement. He was standing there and staring at me. I was silently staring at him. Neither of us was moving. It took a few seconds for anything to move from this, mostly because I was seriously confused about what was happening here, and he had been caught by a child. As soon as he started moving towards me, I literally screamed as loud as I could. This caught this guy off guard, and he started scrambling toward the window. I turned to run toward the stairs, and I ran into my dad, who I had apparently woken up from screaming. He was asking what was going on. I was pointing toward the storage room, shouting incoherently, and the guy in there was trying his best to climb out of the window. My dad pushed me to the side and ran into the storage room and tried to grab this guy as he escaped, but he had only snapped his backpack off him before he ran out into the yard. So obviously, they called the cops about this, and they showed up to check out the situation. From what they could tell, the guy had broken into the basement at some point from the same window he crawled out of. What's scary, we have no idea when he had broken in. We hadn't been in the basement for the whole day, and he didn't look like he had snow on him. So he was dried off. The backpack that he left behind just had some clothes and food in it, as well as a few Polaroids of random people, at least seemingly random. We have no idea who any of them were, or where they were taken or why he had them, but the cops ended up taking them. From what I know, they didn't catch the guy, and they have no idea what it was all about. It was definitely possible that he was a homeless guy that was looking for a place to stay, but it was still really weird that he decided to break into our basement and stay there. Plus, this wasn't a city or anything. It was a small neighborhood, and we didn't have any homeless people that were seen around that area. That's honestly the scariest part. No one had ever seen this guy before or after, and he wasn't part of our community. That's honestly the scariest thing that ever happened to me, and while some people may not think it's too creepy because nothing happened, it was enough to make me refuse to go down to the basement alone ever again. I love to go hiking in the winter, mostly through large patches of woods near where I live, mostly because most people don't go hiking when it's cold out, and especially not when it's snowing. Because of this, I can usually enjoy around an hour or two just walking the paths and feeling the cold air as it rushes against my skin, and I can usually get some really pretty pictures of the snowfall and various woodland creatures. Out here, you can usually see a couple squirrels, some cardinals, and every once in a while, a deer. While I usually don't see anyone along the paths, and it's incredibly quiet in the area, sometimes you do run into random people, and typically, it's light conversation, and you both move on with your day. Nothing about this area, this park, or these paths have ever screamed creepy or strange. That's not to say there are a few strange things that haven't happened, and that I haven't run into a few people that I would consider out there. I think the strangest thing I have ever found on the path, other than what this story is about, was one of those fancy rocks that people paint to leave behind on the trails that was painted to look like a skull. It was actually pretty neat. I found it, took a picture of it, and left it on another part of the trail. I also once found a Bible in the middle of the path, which I guess that some people could think that's creepy. I just assumed someone dropped it. There was one day that I decided I would go for a walk with my dog out in the park just after a fairly heavy snowfall. It had been snowing pretty much all night and all morning, so there were a few inches of accumulation. I laced up my boots and got my dog ready for the cold. Then we headed out the door and went towards the nearby woods. Honestly, it was gorgeous out that day. The ground was blanketed in white, the sky was a bit of a gray-blue, and everything else had that pale reflective color it gets when there's snow on the ground. What's even better, when I got out to the path, it was completely silent, the only exception being the birds singing. If I could give a description of Zen, it would have been that morning in the woods. So, my pup and I are walking the path as we have many times before, and just overall enjoying the view. He's more so enjoying the snow piles off to the side. We get about halfway through the path when I see something up ahead in a small clearing. It's small and has a bit of a glint to it, but I don't really think much of it at first. Maybe it's just something that someone dropped at some point. I just kept walking the trail and moving forward toward whatever it was. When I got closer to it, I noticed that it wasn't the only thing that was there. As I stepped up to the object, I noticed that there was something written in the snow. In the snow by the trail, in a flattened part of the ground, was the phrase, "I'm sorry." It was written as if someone had gotten on their knees and used their hand to write it out in the snow. The only problem with that is the fact that there were no footprints anywhere on the path or near the writing. With the exception of where it was written, the snow on the path and on the clearing was completely undisturbed. It was as if either the person who wrote this wasn't touching the ground at all, or the snow fell in every single place other than where it was written. Either way, something weird had certainly happened in that spot. To compound the weirdness, the object that was next to the message in the snow, it was a photograph, an old one, of a little girl. It looked like the photo was from the 70s or 80s, based on her clothing and how faded it was, and the frame was a fairly fancy one. It was metal. And while some people may think that a message and picture in the snow wasn't creepy, it absolutely freaked me the hell out. I took my dog and we immediately walked back to the apartment. I have no idea who was in the picture, and I have no idea how anyone was able to write a message in the snow without leaving footprints, but I didn't go walking that path again until after the snow had melted. And no, the picture wasn't there anymore either, thankfully. So that, my friends, was a collection of scary winter stories. And I know one of them was in April, but there was a large or big snowstorm, so that's why I included it. But the winter is my favorite season, but I know that's not how a lot of people feel. So not liking winter and then having something like this to experience, not a good combination, and I'm sorry. But thank you for sharing the stories with us. So, if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing. And lastly, don't forget to leave a comment on your thoughts. And with that being said, my friends, I hope you have a fantastic week. And until next time, take care.